Hey friends, Jen here. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to Homes That Heal. Okay, before we dive in today, I want to point you to the sauna sale that's going on right now. Full disclosure, there is a price increase happening in a few weeks across the board for all Clearlight saunas. So if you're at all interested in getting a sauna, it's been on your bucket list for years, or you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, please hop over to jenhellerlifestyle.com. Shop, download the price list, send me a note, whatever you got to do. Let's get your wellness wheel rolling in the right direction for 2025. Seriously, I cannot stress enough how today is the best day to prioritize your health and to never take another day for granted. When you set down the excuses and invest in yourself, the game changes. You feel fantastic, you feel alive, and you feel electric. It's truly a gift to own a sauna in your home, and it's seriously a game-changing tool for so many reasons. If you have chronic pain, headaches, Lyme disease, neuropathy, mold exposure, heavy metal toxicity like I had, or maybe you're just ready to lose 25, 50, or 100 pounds like me, or maybe you feel fantastic and you want to stay proactive and create more longevity, please, seriously, let's go. Let's get you on your path to fabulous. Go to jenhellerlifestyle.com and choose you today. All right, speaking of saunas and changing lives, today is an incredible show. To be honest, this is probably one of the most important conversations that I've recorded to date because we step outside the lines of our usual Homes That Heal conversation and into the why it can be critical to create a wellness space in your home. Today, I'm talking with Bryan Willingham, a career firefighter, captain paramedic, and union president of the local 493 in Phoenix, Arizona, representing 2,900 firefighters in 6 cities. He's also a husband, father of 5, and a grandpa to Buttons, his 20-month-old granddaughter. Don't you just love the name Buttons? As many of you already know, I am deeply passionate about supporting our first responders with the tools they need to safely detox and bring more wellness into their world. This is a job that not only is super stressful mentally, but the exposure of toxic chemicals and carcinogens to their body is mind-blowing. I've worked with thousands of firefighters over the years, and the common denominator is that they're struggling both mentally and physically. Plus, most have had or are working through some form of debilitating cancer. Bryan is not only super passionate about his own health and well-being, but has also dedicated his life to supporting other firefighters to take better care of theirs. A few years ago, Bryan was overtaken by the dark thoughts of ending his own life. Fortunately, he found a path that helped walk him through to the other side of this situation and shares that with us today. He's also going to highlight how creating a healing home environment and a healthy daily routine has been the key to maintaining his well-being. Bryan recently incorporated an infrared sauna, red light therapy, and frequency vibration therapy system into his home, among other things, as part of his wellness wheel. Whether you're a firefighter, you know one, or just want to better understand how they sacrifice to save us, sit back and soak in this real and raw conversation. Bryan is a wealth of knowledge and a huge voice in the firefighter community. We connected through our mutual friend and fellow wellness warrior, Tony, and I'm super grateful for our friendship and our conversation today. So without further ado, please welcome Bryan Willingham to the show. Are you struggling with low energy, weight gain, hormonal imbalances, or heavy metal and mold toxicity? Do you want to learn more about anti-aging tips and creating more longevity in your life? Well, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jen Heller, a wellness educator, infrared sauna expert, and home health consultant. In this podcast, Homes That Heal, I will teach you how to transform your home into a health and wellness sanctuary. Your health is your wealth, and I believe that your home should be your sanctuary space, loaded with the tools you need to thrive in your life, not just survive. If you want to feel fantastic and transform your life and home, grab a pen, let's dive in and create a home that heals. Hey friends, Jen here. Welcome back to another episode of Homes That Heal. Today I am joined by Bryan Willingham, and he is a firefighter in Phoenix, Arizona. And this conversation is really important to me. It's one that I've been waiting probably many years to have. Bryan is a long-term career firefighter, and we're going to have an interesting conversation about physical, mental health, the day in the life of a firefighter. So thank you so much, Bryan, for joining me today. I'm a little all over the board because I have so many things I want to talk about. But first and foremost, I just want to give you gratitude for taking the time to sit down today.
No, Jen, it's an honor for me, really. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm pretty busy with everything that I do. I'm a captain paramedic on a fire truck in Maryvale, which is on the west side of Phoenix, and I'm the union president, right? So I'm a pretty busy guy, but these things are really important. There's a lot of things that I would hope to someday impart so that the community, all communities, understand what firefighters, police officers, and public safety servants do for them, because I don't think most people know.
I agree. And the more that I've been working with firefighters and first responders for the better part of 15 years, when I opened my wellness center, my sauna studio years ago, I was next to a fire department. And that was just, by happenstance, right? That's where my passion started, was the firefighters kept coming over asking if they could use the saunas after they were on a scene or after they had dealt with something quite traumatic, or just once they figured out I was there, literally 30 feet from their back door, they would just trickle on over and say, "Hey, can I sit in a sauna for a bit?" And oftentimes it was after hours. It was in the evening. So it was something that they needed to decompress, at the end of the day. So you and I connected through another firefighter through some referral. I want to find out two things first. I want you to share your story, but I'm also curious. Obviously, being a firefighter is something that everyone's like, "Oh, I want to grow up to be a firefighter."
Yeah.
I want to know why you stepped into this 30 years ago. Walk me through that journey.
So I appreciate you asking that. And I'm not the stereotypical story, right? I grew up in the East Bay, up in Northern California. History, like everybody has a story. Some of my story is pretty traumatic, and I don't tell it for empathy or sympathy from other people, but I think it kind of captures the evolution of how I got here. I grew up in Section 8 housing, was very poor. My mom was a drug addict. She kind of put me in situations and circumstances that were very uncomfortable and traumatized me with some abuse, sexual and physical, as well as verbal and some things like that. But I was also very fortunate in that my grandparents took me in about 6, 7 years old, and they had no money, but they had a lot of love. They embraced me and really taught me what it was to feel love. And of course, I struggled with that for a while, right? Had some things that I needed to exercise, some demons. I was kind of a violent kid for a while. Probably would have ended up in prison, if not worse, on drugs, whatever. I was going down that path for a while, and I relocated. So I ended up moving to Arizona because my dad lived here, and kind of gave my own self. I made a choice to make a fresh start and get away from some of that stuff. I didn't want to be a firefighter because I had burnt down my backyard playing with matches when I was a kid, and it almost burnt down some houses. And then obviously you folks in California understand how bad that can get. We were fortunate. We didn't burn down any homes. However, I had a firefighter lecture me for an hour and a half or so, and I hated him. I was angry because I was an angry kid. So I played a little bit of football in junior college, and I was really stumbling and not knowing what I wanted to do. Had a gal break up with me that broke my heart and kind of basically suggested that I was a little bit of a loser, for lack of a better term. But it motivated me, and she had called me up a couple weeks later because she did care about me, and she said, "Hey, why don't you ride with my buddy who works for Oakland Fire?" I did that one time, and I was hooked. So the long and short of that is there's a psychosis to this, and I didn't know it at the time, but helping people became a bit of a savior for me because of all the anger and all the things that I had had happen to me as a kid. I found some sort of gratification that I couldn't explain. I don't even think I could have articulated at the time. I think it was more of a subconscious thing, but helping people made me feel amazing. So I became addicted to helping people, which oddly was even a bit of a problem for me. I was hired by Contra Costa County up there in the Northern California as a reserve. I worked for an ambulance in Oakland for a while. I saw that wildfire hit in Oakland, California in 1991, and it inspired me. I became a hotshot for a couple years for the Forest Service. And then I got on a fire department here in Arizona called Rural Metro. That inspired me to get hired with Phoenix Fire Department, known as one of the best fire departments in the world. I'm not saying that because I work here. It's what ended up getting me here, right? Like I was motivated because I had heard so much about them. And I've been there now 25 years. So this is, I think, actually my 34th year in the fire service. I'm a captain, I'm a paramedic, and my passion has evolved from not just running those calls, but fighting for the people. I like helping the people that help people. So I fight for their wages, hours, working conditions. And really it's evolved into a lot of mental health and cancer prevention and things like that that I'm really passionate about.
Holy cow, I wasn't expecting that. That's a hell of a story. Thank you for sharing. I think you probably talked about this, but I'm curious when you said you can't articulate now, not the same thing, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I've had the opportunity to ride along with firefighters over the course of the last 10 years that I've kind of been working with them. They've invited me into their life because I've said, I want to understand what you go through. I'm not putting on the gear and actually participating. However, Madison, Wisconsin Fire did invite me to come spend some time with them. And I got to go out on the truck with them, like on calls. I spent the day educating on saunas and then got a call. We jumped on the truck and I got to go. And it was like, I can't even describe it into words, the exhilaration, but the adrenaline and like everything that's going on in that experience. So my question for you is on that first day that you got to do a ride along, if you could articulate it now outside of, I guess, what you had said that you enjoy helping people, what was the feeling that day that you were like, this is what I want to do?
Really, it's the same thing you just described, but if you boil it down pathophysiologically, I think there's a chemical like endorphin release, right? Dopamine, serotonin, it's a rush. But even further than that, like the calls, I don't remember all of the calls. I do remember one specific shooting that we ended up going to Highlands Trauma Center in Oakland, which is a very notorious, they're very good at what they do. It was just such an adrenaline rush. But really what gripped me and what I think pulled me into it was the family environment, the fraternity, like that camaraderie. Having played sports most of my life, which probably saved my life in some circumstances, there's something about being around other people fighting for a common goal and a cause where you're entrenched in helping other people and you're not focused on yourself or your own needs or wants or desires. And then them sharing their stories and finding out about who they are as human beings, how they ended up there. And like, it was just an incredible environment. Breaking bread at a fire station, sitting down for a meal, having to leave your meal, a hot plate of, food after you haven't maybe eaten all day, and putting a piece of tinfoil or a paper towel over it so it at least keeps while you're on a call, and then not getting back there for another hour and a half, 2 hours, but laughing it up and enjoying that you're starving, you're exhausted, you're fatigued. Man, it's amazing.
Yeah.
There's some drawbacks to that, but they catch up to you. So you don't notice that in that moment.
I think that's why I'm asking is because oftentimes, like with a lot of things, but this particular industry, I'm always enamored, like with all the challenges, and that's what I want to move into next is the health and the physical and the mental challenges. But with all of that, you know what you're signing up for, but like, what is the draw? Like, what keeps you there? And what you just articulated was exactly what every other firefighter or first responder has told me. It's the family, it's the unity, it's the passion that runs deep in that circle that everybody's got each other's back. I know you and I were chatting the other day on the phone. The military is another group that I would compare to some degree. It's like, you know what you're stepping into, and there's this deep level of loyalty. And I remember the first time I was in a fire station where we were all sitting around, we were having lunch. Actually, I had just educated on infrared heat. We had a really great, deep conversation in and around mental health and some of the things that they deal with. All of a sudden, the alarms go off, and it was like unison. I was the legger, right? Like I didn't realize that you have to get up as quickly as you do. Everybody's up, everybody's out, moving to the truck, and they're like, let's go. So that's what we did. I figured that was your answer, but I just really appreciate you sharing that because I think that's what people are, need to understand a bit. I know that we talked a bit about your experience with ketamine. I want to touch on that a little bit, but what do you see as the biggest mental health challenges, like from a day to day? Obviously, you've got almost 35 years into this or 34 years. You've seen it as it's evolved over these decades. What do you see as the biggest physical and mental challenges and how they take a toll?
The first one is easy. The rest of it's kind of complicated and muddy. The biggest challenge is eliminating the stigma, okay? If you want to be a firefighter, man, woman, it doesn't matter. You have physical challenges. You have to be physically fit. You have to be mentally strong and able or capable of doing the job and able to kind of suppress some of that stuff that you see or at least have some tools to be able to deal with that. There's a lot of attributes that you have to have. Firefighters are very intelligent. I mean, maybe there's a stigma out there in society that they break windows, they break into cars. They're these ex-jocks. I don't know if that's what some people feel or not, but the men and women that I work around are some of the smartest people I've ever met. They're experts off the job too, in construction and computer. They have different careers a lot of times. They go to school, they're educated. We have people with master's degrees. We have attorneys that work on our fire department. We have ex-NFL, NHL, and NBA athletes on the Phoenix Fire Department, multiple, right? They find their way to our career because for the same reason I did, right? They see that camaraderie and like, maybe I spent 4 years in the NFL, but I want to do this now because that's something that will allow me to give back to the community and, fulfill some needs that I have. But the way to answer the question initially, the best way I know how is it's the stigma of PTSD and mental health because you have to be this, you're helping everybody, right? They call 911. They want you to come. You got to be the most stable, most intelligent person. You're there to fix their problem in minutes, if not seconds, solve every problem that they're asking you to solve. Then you go out and you do it for somebody else, right? So it's call after call after call. But deep down, these things start affecting you, like the drownings, the vehicle accidents. I ran on a vehicle accident several years ago where these two gals, sisters, wrong way driver on the freeway. It was a mess, right? Like you see these things and you deal with the emotions of their families, their houses burned down. You're saving their pictures, and one little picture might be enough to bring them a smile. Or maybe you save their cat or their dog or their pet frog, whatever it might be. There's this roller coaster of emotions. Here's the second largest challenge I think we have. When fire departments first became full-time, like a lot of them, there's still a lot of volunteer fire departments back east. They don't have the budgets to provide for full-time firefighters. But we work extensive hours. Typically, most fire departments across the United States are working 2,912 hours in a year. Somebody who works a 9 to 5 or 40 hours a week, they're working 9 to 5, 40 hours, 2,080 hours a year, okay? So in a year, we're working over 800 more hours. Now we have mandatory overtime. So it's not just the amount of hours that you're working on your normal required obligatory shifts. You're working additional hours on top of that because there's staffing issues. You can't leave a fire truck running short, okay? 3-person on a fire truck is not a good thing. You need 4. There's reasons for that. We can go into that, right? Everybody's got a role. If somebody codes, if somebody's pulseless, apneic, they're not breathing, they don't have a heart rate, everybody's got a role. You have somebody giving pharmacological intervention, electrical intervention, somebody's getting the equipment ready, intubating, helping them breathe, somebody's pumping on their chest for CPR, for circulation. You're doing all these things, so you can't have less than that. So when somebody calls in sick and they work in a cubicle, and I'm not taking any shot at anybody that does any job on the planet, I support labor no matter what you do. And every job is critical and role is important in society. But on a fire truck, you have to backfill that person. That person that might call in sick in a cubicle, you may not have to backfill that spot. They get sick days and blah, blah, blah. Well, for us, we have to have those 4 people on a truck, and ladders, you might have to have 5 or 6. So staffing is a very, very critical thing. Well, that costs money, taxes, yada, yada, yada. But in this shift schedule specifically, they were designed years ago. Firefighters don't make overtime after 40 hours. They make overtime after the 53rd hour. It's the Fair Labor Standards Act has what's called a 7K exemption that mandates what we get paid in excess of a 53-hour work week. So in the olden days, firefighters would show up and they might play volleyball and kill some time in a 24-hour period. And there were things, you run a few calls. Most fire departments are not like that anymore. We have over 40 trucks in the Phoenix Fire Department that run over 4,000 calls a year. You have to start doubling up those stations and putting more apparatus at about the 2,500 to 3,000 mark. We have calls running over 6,000. LA has trucks that are running more than that. You FDNY and these large major metropolitan areas, they have substantial call volumes. So you could have gotten rest in the olden days, but now you're not getting that. So now you have the sleep deprivation. I've read enough, and I'm not an expert on PTSD, but I know enough because I've tried to become my own personal advocate and expert for it. The sleep deprivation for me is the number one thing that we have to combat outside of eliminating the stigma and getting people to open up and talk, because that's forbidden in our world, right? It used to be. We're getting better.
Yeah, I think it's turning a corner from what I can see because I think we have to, or I think that I don't want to give any kind of credit to social media by any stretch, but there's more information, there's more dialogue, there's more conversation going. And I think the way that social media kind of opens this up a bit, or whether it be private forums, is people are willing, and this is just what I hear from other firefighters and other, people in these types of roles, they're willing to type and share information behind, people call them keyboard warriors or whatever you want to call them. But in this circumstance, I'm grateful for it because you have people willing to share information and start talking before they get to a face-to-face conversation. They start opening up. You get into some of these chat rooms, there's a lot of conversation and some things going on because they're more willing to at least step forward and say, hey, I've got a problem, or hey, I have something going on, versus coming to your face saying, I need help. So I think that's what's changed a bit in the last 10, 20 years, is that there's more online conversation and more common ground, if you will. People are talking more versus coming to the fire station and saying, 20, 30 years ago, before we had the World Wide Web, it was up to you to say something or you did it, right? It's just like you say it or you don't. And then you go home and then you deal with it and you come back. Now there's so much conversation online that it's kicked this door open.
Yeah.
That's my thought on it.
No, you're 100% right. And honestly, a lot of credit has to go to our nation's military, right? Our military has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to dive into this and find, they've had multiple suicides. You get these soft community folks. I know a few Navy SEALs and Rangers and these guys, and they're some of the best humans I've ever met. But them coming forward and now starting to talk about it. You YouTube PTSD on like just in the search bar, and you YouTube this, you put in the search, PTSD or anything related to it, you're going to get Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and, Delta Force folks that'll come out. They're doing these videos and trying to help it because they've had too many of their folks commit suicide and go down that pathway, and they're suffering. For years, they suffered in silence. And now that you have some of these people that have that type of stature, like those are the people I look at. That's why I was afraid to admit when I finally got it in 2021. I was one of those people like, really? Like, we're firefighters. We're not Navy SEALs. We're not invading Afghanistan and taking flak and getting shrapnel put in our arm. Like, we're just not that community. And one of my buddies who's a Navy SEAL was like, let me stop you. You have no idea what you're talking about. And he was right? So I had to look inward, but I had to accept too that this is a normal thing. Your brain, our brains are no different than our knees or our hips or our shoulders or any joints, right? There's wear and tear that happens over a period of time. The sleep deprivation being the number one thing. If you're not getting adequate sleep and you can't recover, you're creating damage in your limbic system specifically, right? Your hippocampus and all these areas in your brain that are in charge of your fight or flight system. And you have to acknowledge that. Now we have the ability to give SPECT scans and look at the damage and show you where it needs to be repaired. And you can actually watch it get repaired over time if you do proper treatment and like all these things that are recommended that I've dove into. And it's incredible. But it took some really spectacular, strong-minded, confident human beings to go, hey, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. 100%. And thank God for that. I think that there are a lot of the sleep deprivation for sure. I mean, if you're not giving your brain oxygen, if you're not resting or restoring, I mean, eventually the buck stops. Like your brain is just not going to function for you. Where everybody can hustle or do what they have to do from time to time, whether it be, in school, you're cramming for tests, or in life, you're just, have something physically or mentally going on where your lack of sleep for a few days or whatever. But this consistent behavior over weeks, months, and years, something's going to stop. And I know that you know this, but I had a stroke years ago. It was kind of a perfect storm of stress and some other things that had happened. Stress to the brain from an explosion that I was in, trauma, concussion to the brain. But it was the perfect storm. And the reason why that triggered for me at that time was the amount of stress I was under and the lack of sleep. That's what I believe. And that's what my medical professionals have said had you been taking better care, getting the rest, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And so that's my passion behind doing this, is to helping people do preventative things instead of trying to chase their health backwards. So take me back to 2021
Yeah.
when you raised your hand and said, I need help. What did you do?
Okay. I want to back up a little bit because I think there's an important piece to this. Remember when I talked about the stigma, and you're very well aware of it. I think anybody in a military or paramilitary organization or somebody that's healthcare understands the stigma comes from just ignorance, right? And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just literally like people don't understand it. I used to say, and a lot of people have still say this, like, hey, you know what you're getting into. You signed up to do this, right? I wish people would stop saying that. Here's why. You don't know what somebody went through 20 years prior to getting on the fire department. Day one, they can have a triggering event on the first call that they go on, having unexpected, like it's a drowning. Maybe they lost their sister in a drowning 20 years ago. We have a gal on the job that shared a story with me years ago, not on the Phoenix Fire Department, but a neighboring fire department. She was gang raped, right? These are very difficult things that people experience in life. You don't know what somebody else has gone through. So for me, I had this cumulative effect of all the things that I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, which I'm always open to share. I feel zero shame anymore. There was a time when I had all that shame, and that creates extra stress. You got to get rid of that stuff. And for me, when I woke up out of a dead sleep with this, so I didn't even feel it coming on. And I was still in that mindset that I'm a fireman. This isn't for me. I signed up to do this. I love this job, yada, yada, yada. But the stress of all these things happening in life just built up on me. My wife had cancer. My brother had cancer. My brother died in 2019 as a result of some of the side effects from that. And these things kind of stack up on everybody in life. Everybody's got their story, right?
Right.
So it woke me up out of a dead sleep, 2:30 in the morning, and my head, for those who've experienced it, will understand this. I had these rapid thoughts that I'd never experienced, and they wouldn't stop. And I know now there was that short circuit in my limbic system, where I wasn't processing things normal anymore, but I didn't know it in that moment. I just wanted to eat a bullet. And I wanted to do it right then, but I needed some time, right? So I started processing that. I didn't sleep for 3.5 weeks. And for anybody who hasn't slept for 24, 48 hours, you just get more and more exhausted. Well, I was doing more and more physical activity thinking, if I just exhaust myself, I'm just going to crash and I'll get that rest I need. So to your question, and I think a lot of firefighters are this way. We're not nurses, we're not doctors, we're not PAs or respiratory therapists, but what we are is we're minimally trained in emergency medicine, right? Firefighters are trained like other health professionals. I consider educated, right? So we get a minimal education where we get a lot of training, but we learn anatomy and physiology. So we learn about the fight or flight system, your parasympathetic, your sympathetic nervous system, and all these things. Myself, 50% of most of your firefighters go on from EMTs to become paramedics also. So it's an additional amount of training. So you learn about all these things, but you're learning about them to help people on calls, not necessarily applying it to how it might affect you, right? So for me, and I think a lot of firefighters, and this is really key when I talk to people about this stuff, is I had to know what was happening to my brain before I would accept any treatments or modalities or help, because I was scared to death to do it. So when your brain gets rerouted like that and there's this short circuit, you're not processing things normally. So perceived threats become real threats to you. I mean, literally, this is a terrible analogy, but if you saw a rubber snake and somebody threw it at you, and when you're in PTSD, you can literally think that's a real snake and then it could kill you. Yeah, I know that sounds a little bit exaggerative, but it's true. And I was doing that. I couldn't put my head under the shower head without thinking I was going to drown. It was a terrible, terrible experience. Nonetheless, I had a family. I have 3 daughters. My wife had 2 boys. We have 5 kids together. I have a home. We have bills just like everybody else. And you're contemplating, man, I can end this right now. But how do you leave these people behind, right? There's people talk about suicide being selfish. I understand the assertion, but If you haven't been there, it's not a selfish thing. You don't want other people to be drawn down because of what you're going through. So there's just it's a catch-22 in a way, right? So for me, reading the first couple weeks and doing audiobooks, the best book I ever read, I wouldn't consider it a good read, but The Body Keeps Score. So Bessel van der Kolk, he's an expert. He's been around for decades, and he talks about all these different experiments and things that they did over decades at the VA, being out in Boston, at Harvard and UMass and all those universities out there. It's like a mecca for mental health, right? So learning what was happening to my brain was key for me to being able to receive and accept treatment. Because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have. That led me through my counselor. I did an EMDR therapy and all these different types of therapy. I was starting to go through all that. But taking one pill, which I was terrified to do because I have people in my family that had died from overdoses and seen them on calls, and I just was mortified at the thought of it. But finally being open to taking one sleeping pill actually almost reset me to where I could, one decent night's rest got me back on track after that 3.5 week period. But it was a year and a half, 2 years worth of work after that, right? That led me to all the therapy. I wasn't open to ketamine at the time. Magnesium was a game changer for me. I still take it to this day. My wife and I do it every night before we go to bed. We have this routine, right? You've heard of soothing, like we turn TV off. Now we're doing our sauna, cold plunge, shower, getting our comfortable clothes on, getting prepared, and gearing down. Don't have any blue light on around you, that TV, that where it's messing up your brain and creating rapid thoughts that keeps you awake, because you have to get that good night's rest. We listen to sounds as we go to sleep. We started out with white noise and then gray noise, and we evolved. You actually turned me on to 432, which
Oh,
is
perfect.
amazing.
Game changer, isn't it? I know. It's so interesting how the body responds to that frequency. I mean, I didn't make it up. It's been around forever, but have you done it in your sauna yet? Or are you just listening to hear you?
Well, we are doing it in the sauna, but we're waiting for the other component that you sent us, the VRT. So yeah, we have been doing that, and I love the sound. So it's actually been we play it all night. I put my Pandora on, and it goes right through my speaker, and it plays all night long at a very low sound, so it doesn't wake you up. But man, it really helps. So we're doing all those things, and ketamine, unreal.
I need you to tell me about this because I got to be totally honest. I know about it. I've heard about it. I've known people who've done it. No one has ever described to me the experience. So I'm excited to hear this.
Yeah. All right. So remember, I wasn't open to a lot of things, and that took me a while to get there. And I do after, because I have one of my daughters has some mental health issues, and she did ketamine before I did. I think she was way more desperate than I was. And when we did that with her, I went with her, I sat with her, but I was really kind of put off by it. They put her in a room, just they come in very impersonal, and they start an IV and they let it run, and we're in there for an hour. And I just sat with her and kind of stroked her hair and held her hand. I think a lot of ketamine is about set and setting. And I'm going to give them a plug because I think part of this saved my life too is there's advanced ketamine in Scottsdale that has this really spectacular way of creating set and setting. The atmosphere, literally the paintings on the walls, the tones of the paints, the chairs that you sit in, as awkward as maybe some people think this might be, they give you like an onyx stone, because you have to be able to realize in your ketamine sometimes that you're still, yeah, there you go. So you're still awake and alive, because some people have what they call like a near-death experience, or they kill their ego, or I don't know about all that stuff. I didn't experience that particularly, but I will tell you this. They do a series of 6. They have integrated counseling with that. You have to start it before you do the ketamine so that you understand what you're doing and you open your mind up to it. I've never done mushrooms, but I've talked to people that have, right? Psilocybins, you have to be in the right atmosphere, the right mood, and all these things. I think it's a little bit like that if I was trying to compare it to something. So I was very open to it and excited and happy to do it. And I just wanted to let it happen. So you have to get yourself prepared in kind of that mode. But when I did it, it was spectacular. My first experience, I was able to, in my own way, I think, communicate with my grandma who's passed, my brother, and these things. And I'm not a super religious person, okay? I'm not a faith-based guy, but I do consider myself spiritual. That was a very, very spiritual experience for me. Experiencing those things opened my mind up. And then the progression of them, because they increase the dosages. You do it 3 days a week for 2 weeks. You skip a day in between. It made me exhausted. I came home because there's all this stuff going through your brain. I slept for hours each time. But they also give you like anti-nauseas because you have an IV, so they can load you up with some vitamin B and some other things that help kind of pull you back out and get you ready for the next one. But you do the integrated counseling between those sessions and long after those sessions. I think I did a month to a month and a half after that. I felt when I did it, just in case any of your listeners are wondering, I felt like I was mostly all through my PTSD. And if I gave a football analogy, like I had marched the ball down 97 yards and I'm 3 yards away from the goal, and all I got to do is kick a field goal to win the game, that's where I thought I was. Going through ketamine made me feel like we scored a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, got the onside kick, got the ball back, scored another touchdown. I was further away than I thought. I had a false sense of confidence because of it. So I'm even more thankful that I did it, because you just don't know where you're at.
Yeah, because I think we get comfortable. I have these conversations a lot with people who are like, oh, I feel fine, or I'm okay. Or when I'm asking questions, people call me. What's interesting now is I would say in the last 15 years, it's shifted for why people are calling me for saunas. They used to be a luxury item. They used to be something like la-di-da, I've got a sauna in my home. Now, 80 to 90% of my conversations are because somebody needs it for cancer, mold toxicity, PTSD, mental health situation, heavy metal toxicity, chronic pain management, migraine, like the list goes on and on. And it's not because they want it. I mean, they want it because they want it, right? For the same reasons you and I use it, because it supports our health, but they're using them as healing and tools to help us get to where we want to go. So the conversations I have with people every day are, tell me what your goals are, what's going on. And then 10, 15, 20 minutes later, they realize that their health isn't mediocre, that they're actually really not well, or they're not feeling well, but it's their normal. They don't understand that there's this massive leap over to joy and freedom and like all these other thoughts and living this quality life, because it's become so normal for them to just survive instead of be thriving. So I love your analogy of the football field, because we can all relate to that for sure. Just so that I'm clear in understanding, you did this for 2 weeks, had some therapies and support in between. Afterwards, you had to stretch out another 4 to 6 weeks of therapies. Tell me a little bit, like during that, let's call it an 8-week period, like dips and valleys, like any ups and downs, or was it just this coasting upwards? What was the experience when you were just not on ketamine?
So a great question, because it's funny. I do get people that will call me because they've heard me on either a radio show or something talking about this to you. I've done conferences where I've given speeches, and then there's a line of people up waiting to tell you, hey man, I need help. What would you recommend? Or they want to say, man, I appreciate you mentioning your molestation. That took some cojones. And that's why you do it, right? Because you know that there's a dozen people out there, every audience that you're speaking in, that have had it and want to talk about it, don't know how to broach the subject. But for me, my experience with ketamine, I think I have to throw a disclaimer out here, not because I'm a doctor or anybody, I'm going to give anybody treatment, but if I've talked to over 100 people that have done ketamine, which I know I have, I would say there's a handful, and I would probably say less than half a dozen that have had a bad experience with it. So this is not a 100% guarantee. People would probably know that, but it's statistically, or at least my own statistical like analysis, if I'm looking at the enormous amount of people I know now that have done it and they continue to try to, they go back and they get boluses and, just kind of reset, out of this world. And mine was mostly an upward trajectory, and not a gradual incline, but pretty steep incline.
Okay.
My third visit, I was 30 minutes into it because they're about an hour, and I was half in, half out. Everybody here's probably had that sleep mode where you feel like you're half asleep, but you're half awake and you're frustrated and something's not working. That's how I felt. But they put a little button on your shirt. You just hit it and they come in and they say, what's going on? I need more. By the way, this is not addictive. I had absolutely no desire after any treatment or after all treatments to seek something. And I research that heavily because I'm paranoid about that. My mom,
Yeah.
all these other people in my life.
Thank you for saying that. That was actually running through my mind is because I think that one, people are afraid because of the stigma of getting addicted to something. My husband was an alcoholic. He's been sober now almost 6 years, thank goodness. But people who have gone through any type of addiction or those tendencies are afraid to do something like this because they're afraid the long-term outcome isn't worth the short-term gain, so to speak. And they're concerned in and around anything pharmaceutical or anything where they don't have control. So thank you for sharing that. I was curious about that.
You know, Jen, you can go a step further with this. The folks that run advanced ketamine in Scottsdale, Arizona, they're all anesthesiologists. Everybody that works there, everybody that delivers that medication and does that process with you,
Mhm.
they're experts, right? This is not street K. People in my life are like, oh, are you kidding? We've seen people on this stuff. Not the same thing. These are micro doses, which is very, very de minimis as it relates to the horse tranquilizers and all these things that people are not even in the same ballpark. So again, I would never advocate anybody like, oh yeah, let's just go do it. Let's find some. There's a couple of different ways, by the way, Jen, to do this. There's intramuscular, there's IV. I chose the IV route, but I've talked to people that have the intramuscular route that enjoyed it and had a great experience as well. But the IV route for me, I like the thought that they could roll that wheel down and slow it down and have more control over it. That's just me.
Yeah, I would resonate with that. I like to have the control to, like you said, back it off or turn it up, whereas if it's something that you can't control, for me, that is a fear that I have. I've never been one to, smoking marijuana in high school or whatever, but like the other drugs and the other things that kids and adults dabble into, I was too afraid. I've always been too afraid of like, what happens if you go down this trip lane and you can't pull back from it? Like you're just on it. For me, mentally, that was never something I was willing to consider. So that's why I'm asking these questions and I'm curious because I like the controllability. Obviously, the professionals that are there to support you understand what they're doing. This isn't just, hey, take this and let's go. It's literally a very strategic dosing of it. You can turn it up, you can turn it down. And I would assume they're monitoring you, your condition, how things are going, and the whole process. Interesting, too, that you had pretty steep trajectory up, which again would lead me. The reason why I was fishing for that question is if you had these dips and valleys, did you get scared at all? I guess the answer is probably no, to not want to go back and not want to fulfill it. Like you get a few sessions in or a few treatments in, and all of a sudden, does the mind dip down? But it sounds like your experience was like you were on the way up and you could feel that trajectory, which then I'm assuming motivated you to continue to move forward.
It did. And going back to my statement earlier, the handful of people that I've talked to, they did their first and some of them made it to their second, even third, and were just like,
Mm.
I can't do it again because they were terrified to go back. That experience for them was bad. And I think people should know that that's a possibility. It's important to get all that counseling preloaded and understand what you're getting into and what your options are. There's no obligation to continue if it's not going well for you.
Right.
They don't want you to continue that, right? If you're having some sort of untoward reaction to it as much as you do, they want you to have a successful experience. It might not be time and maybe you just hold off and go back. That said, I look at the things that it's leading to also. It's not just ketamine now. You look at all these experimentations, and I'm not advocating for any of these. I haven't done any of these, but look at what they're doing with psilocybins, even LSD, MDMA, all these different things at microdosages, they
Mm.
have different effects. I've talked to people that have had spectacular results on a lot of those. Very intriguing to me, not intriguing that I want to go out and experience it because I'm in a very healthy space and I don't want to disrupt that.
Right.
I want to stick to the organic stuff right now as far and by the way, psilocybin is organic, but my point is like the sauna that I got from you, the cold
Yeah.
plunge, the red light therapy. I want to stick to that stuff and really focus on being proactive about not letting that stuff creep back in.
Yeah. With this all being available, I do see there's so much more conversation and there's so much more knowledge as well as statistics to support that some of this plant-based medicine and these things that are available. I think we're going to see more of it over the next 5 to 10 years for sure. I mean, there's definitely a shift moving in the health and wellness space for sure. It's more acceptable, I think, because A, there's more people experimenting with it and having great success. And B, some of these other things haven't been working. Some of the pharmaceuticals and some of the other stuff, it's just pile on, pile on, pile on. And some of it's just not working for us. We're energetic beings. So in my mind, naturally, we're going to go back to things that are natural, plant-based, a little bit more grounded to the earth. So I'm excited for that shift. I'm here for it. I was hopeful that it would happen in my lifetime, and here we are. But what do you see from the fire industry cutting through the red tape and the noise? And I guess we'll use the term stigma. Where do you see the fire industry and the first responder industry going with some of these options, as well as even just the sauna, the cold plunge? Tons of fire stations calling me, asking me to get saunas in fire stations. Now it was kind of quiet for a few years. Now all of a sudden they're coming out of the woodwork. So what's happening in the industry and what do you see going into the future?
I'm actually actively engaged in helping to try to aid some of that along because as a union, we're very proactive and involved in politics, passing legislation and doing things.
Mhm.
We have to be extraordinarily careful, more careful probably than most groups. And here's what I mean by that. We helped pass the legalization of marijuana in this state, not because we want firefighters using it, but because the revenue and people are using it, right? And there are some benefits that we've seen people with seizures that it eliminates those seizures when other meds don't work. To your statement earlier, a lot of these medications for mental health have not only proven to not work, they exacerbate your issues. They may work temporarily. You get this brief experience of relief from whatever medication. But my own daughter, I have no problem telling you, it made her suicidal. Once we finally got away from medications, she still struggles. Like, I think that may be a lifelong deal. That's hard to accept. But these prescription pharmaceutical synthetic materials, I'm not a huge fan. I'm not saying they don't work for everybody, because in some cases they do. But to your point, I want to accelerate at least acceptance of testing. Okay. Testing in large environments where people are volunteering, and like some of that is even prohibited. So the red tape, you're right. The bureaucracy, I live in a very, very red state. More than half my members are, they vote with that block. And then we got the others. Like, I try to stay in the middle because I have to represent all of them. But there are politicians that are anti, like, I would imagine I'm quite a bit older than you. Okay. So in my generation, I grew up, Ronald Reagan was the president. They came up with that campaign, the war on drugs. I think and this isn't a political statement, but there was just a ton of misinformation that marijuana was the boogeyman. I'm only talking about marijuana because it's applicable and germane to all this other stuff we're talking about. But marijuana was the boogeyman, right? The real boogeyman that I've seen in the streets is Oxycontin, oxycodone.
Yeah.
These are prescription medications, and people that are getting them prescriptions way over the allotted dosages. Now they have to have tracking systems for that. But I've seen that kill so many people. Now it's laced with fentanyl, and fentanyl's 10 times worse than that. And that's prescription type medications. These synthetic medications are what I've seen always kill people. Like you, I'm very open to the idea. I've seen success with people with OCD. It calms them down. They do one treatment with MDMA or one treatment. There's a whole show on Netflix about this where they actually film this happening with these people. These natural substances in micro dosages, they're finding these amazing healthcare benefits. Like I said, I don't know that I'm in the category of somebody that should be worrying about that, but here's the complication with the fire service. We have a list of medications and things that if they're found in our system, it's not a legal issue for us. It's a ethical and a violation of a list of prohibited medications or substances we can take because we drive these 20,000-pound apparatus around on streets, right? That's a problem. So
It's a problem.
trying to balance the legality of marijuana and how does it test? Like, it's not like alcohol. You can do a breathalyzer and you're at 0.01, you're at 0.07, you're at point whatever. Marijuana, it can show, hey, you're positive, but you could have smoked it 3 months ago or taken a gummy 2 months ago, like whatever. I don't know how to decipher all that, but here's what I believe. There are a lot of people fighting for, and even firefighters and unions fighting for the right to test this stuff. at a more rapid pace and a larger scale so that we can at least figure out if there's healthcare benefits. So like if somebody has PTSD, they can't be on a truck either. Firefighter, police officer, they can't be on the streets serving. Police officer has to surrender their weapons, surrender their badge. They're suffering in silence because they don't want to give up their ability to care for their family and provide for them, yada, yada, yada. Well, to be able to test this stuff so that at least if they're off a truck is where I would like to see it go for firefighters and them specifically. And I'm speaking for myself, nobody else. I would like to see it go in that direction so that we at least have the data to support one way or the other, good, bad, and different. Let's look at what the results of the tests are. So we're fighting for legislation like that here in Arizona.
Wow. Okay. I never even considered the fact that you're driving around. I mean, obviously, if I have an emergency, the people that come to help me or save my life, I would like for them to be sober, I guess, so to speak, or, in the right of mind. But when you explain it like that, it's like, how do you step away from your job to be able to go support and take care of yourself with these other options if they're going to show up in your system? Like, how do you discern between recreational and abuse versus this is what this person is doing to support their mental health and well-being, yet they also drive around this massive truck and they clearly need to be sound mind to do so. So I can see how this is complicated. That's a very interesting line to toe. In my world, in the sauna world, as you and I have talked about, I know you've only had your sauna for a few weeks, but I want to hear how it's integrated and weaved into your daily system or your daily routines. I love your routine, by the way. Everything that you're doing into the evening, the blue lights, like bringing the body down into more of a parasympathetic state. That's fabulous. So for me, I mean, 10 years ago, I went to Indianapolis to educate on infrared heat, and we had a booth there, and we were, the IAFF, or what is that event? I can't even think of it at the moment.
The International Association of Firefighters, our national
Yeah.
and international.
Like the largest firefighter convention ever, right? And so there's 50,000 firefighters walking around, and there was definitely, and we had been there, I had been there a few times.
Where was it?
Indianapolis?
Okay, so you might be talking about one of our symposiums, yeah, like a
Yeah.
Redmond symposium or something.
Yeah. I mean, I remember it just being like one of the largest. It was just a massive situation. And a lot of people wouldn't even talk to me. Like they were like, we don't want to hear about your heat therapy. We don't want to hear about your infrared. We don't care what it does. It's not going to help us. It's like, well, how do you even know? Infrared light energy's been around forever. It's not new. Heat therapy, sauna bathing, that's ancient wisdom. I mean, outside of the US, a lot of other countries have saunas in their homes. Sauna bathing, heat therapy, it's not a new way to heal and restore the body. And like I said, so I did that for a few years. I wrote a book on how infrared heat can help firefighters. And then I just got pummeled with a ton of kickback and pushback and angry organizations saying, don't show us this stuff. We don't want to know. And I thought, well, why would you not want to know that really you guys run into a toxic soup every day intentionally? Like the body wasn't designed to take on that kind of overload and burden. And here's this light energy that allows your body to detox and get all that junk out. So it's starting to come around again. I'm starting to get the phone calls. The firefighters, you and I have a mutual friend, Tony. That's how we met. He reached out to me. He came from another, like the firefighters themselves are talking and getting saunas and cold plunges and red light therapies and these modalities in their homes because they want to support their health. Now, I would say in the last 6 to 12 months, now my phone is ringing from fire departments again, asking, and a lot of them are people I spoke to or have my card and, thank God they kept it and knew how to find me. But they're like, okay, Jen, now we're interested in talking. Now we've got a little bit more information and data. Now we've got more people who've raised their hand and said, we want to know more. And I think it is because the voices of the firefighters are saying, they're raising their hands saying, we need more help. We need more support. We need more ways to take care of our bodies so that we can show up every day in this job and do what we love. What has been your experience with this?
Well, it's exactly the same as yours, right? But there's the old adage that I like in the fire department. You may have heard it before, but there's two things firefighters don't like: the way things are and change. They're terrified to change. They hate the way things are, right? There's a culture in our fire service, and the evolution to change anything that we do, it's painful. It's really painful. If it's driven by the top down, it never goes well, meaning like at the chief or administrative level. But if it's driven by the bottom up, and that's what you're experiencing, They probably got suppressed top down because they're terrified. Like, what are you talking about? Now we got to learn this too. They're already asking for new fire trucks. They want this. They want better pay. They want this. Now you're going to throw this at us too. We can't afford that. You know how it is. And we're government workers, right? The largest portion of every municipality in the United States, the largest allocation of the budget is public safety. We're government employees. That it drives me crazy when I hear people anti-government. That's police and fire mostly, right? I understand the sentiment, I guess, but like your largest component to your city governments are public safety, firefighters, police officers. They're expensive to run. A fire department is extremely expensive to run. A police department is extremely expensive to run. What you experienced is what we experience with literally everything we want to do. Hey, I read the book. I read 10 books. I did this podcast. We've done all the research. Like here, by the way, research nowadays is a bad word too, right? Am I doing research in a laboratory with beakers? No, I'm not. But when I try to do my homework, or our folks on the job, they love doing that stuff. Hey, I want to try to learn something and do something different and help our folks. They try to carry it up through their systems, and you get met with resistance because the first thing somebody in an administrative role wants to do is they want to, what's the cost? Like, how much is that going to cost us? What do we got to do? And they're pinching pennies, and their boss is looking at them like, you guys got to stop spending money, and it's taxpayer money. So you're trying to be responsible with their money. So all these things. But to your point, yeah, it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly frustrating. It's literally every day what I deal with. I need more money to support these guys with cancer. I need more money for PTSD. Sauna specifically, I remember the argument come up a few years ago. There's a department in the valley that had one at the station. The word started getting out. Man, this is great for detoxification. My brain immediately went to, that makes sense. Opens up your pores, you sweat it out. Have you ever been next to a fireman after a fire, even 24 hours later, Jen?
Yeah, they were in my sauna studio. They stink. They reek. That's why I ended up donating saunas to their stations because I'm like, I love you guys, but you're ruining my white towels, and my sauna studio smells like a smokehouse for 24, 40 hours afterwards. But how alarming and disgusting. And so again, the very first time I ever saw, there were two of the firefighters sitting in my sauna. They were sitting in shorts, so they weren't totally naked, but they invited me, they said, Jen, come in here. See their arms, Bryan, like I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's like they were black on the arms. I was like, what the hell is that? It was all the soot, all the garbage pouring out of their arms. And the smell was like enough to choke you out. And that was after the fact. And I'm just exposed to what they were carrying around. Like I said, I'm not a firefighter, never have been, don't have any firefighters in my family. I became deeply passionate about this because of what I saw, smelled, and felt with my own body. And what you guys go through, it was like, what in the world is going on here? This is a tool that at the very least you guys need to know exists so that you can have it as a supporting system. But yeah, that is, I don't even know how, I mean, do you just get immune to that smell? Is that just like what comes home with you?
Don't, but you learn to accept it, right? And
Yeah.
this is where I think the rub came in, at least the way we recall it, I recall it specifically in our organization, is somebody made a comment at one point like, well, if you're opening up your pores, aren't you pulling all that stuff into? And I actually can see the argument, right?
Yeah, I can. I heard that 1,000 times.
But you can wash off and scrub, and there's a set of things that you can do before you get into the sauna. I have a special soap in my shower before I do the sauna or the cold plunge, right? Because I want to keep my cold plunge clean, but I don't want that stuff getting to my pores. So to the average layperson that might be listening to this, that may not know a firefighter in their life, that's never experienced that, I've had that smell on me for 72 hours before. That means those toxins, carcinogens, are on my skin, in my pores, in my nasal cavities, in my eyes, by the way, or in the firefighter's eyes that they might know, and it's getting absorbed. And that's why we have exponentially higher rates of cancers. I told you before the call started, we lost a guy yesterday to cancer, line of duty. There's what's called presumptive loss, but he acquired cancer because of the job, the very job you want to do for the good of the people and to serve the community and for all the right reasons is the very thing that ended up taking his life. And we have this regularly. For every 100 people that Vincere Cancer Institute here in the state of Arizona, in Scottsdale also, by the way, for those that don't know, like Scottsdale is right next to Phoenix. We have a mutual aid system, so we run calls together, we work together, great fire department. But obviously I work for Phoenix, and a lot of businesses kind of across that border, right? So Vincere is located there, but they actually are in charge of running our health center. So they do all the cancer screening and testing and all that stuff. For every 100 people that they test, Jen, they find 7 or 8 cancers. So we've tested 900 people in the Phoenix Fire Department. We have another 900 to go. Some people are just procrastinating it, and they're busy. They got families. They got all this stuff. So we know, just statistically speaking, we have 70-ish cancers out there walking around that don't know it. The earlier you catch it, the better chance you have of defeating it. You don't want to catch cancer in stage 3 or 4. You want to catch it in its earliest phase. It's like a fire. We say the incipient phase when it first starts. It grows at 2 times every minute. It doubles in size. So you catch it early, you can snuff it out, minimal collateral damage to your home. You save the pictures, the animals, yada, yada, yada. Same with cancer. You got to catch it early. Saunas, that's why my wife and I bought it, for the very reason you mentioned 10, 15 minutes ago. We want to do this preventative. I'm tired of doing eulogies for firefighters. It's the worst thing I do in my job. And I got a couple coming up. We had a couple last month. Like, these things they're terrible. And unfortunately, most of them are cancers. If you go back to Colorado Springs, we have what's called the Fallen Firefighter Memorial. You go to that wall, there's 85+% of those people on that wall that are all line of duty cancer deaths. That's what it is. So this stuff is preventative.
Yeah.
Should be used as such. Of course, I think it can treat, and you know more about that than I do, but that's why we got it.
Yeah, I think the important thing is once you start sweating, as you know, you start wiping it off your body, the body continues to release. What you're doing is opening up the detox pathways, asking the lymphatic system to work for you, asking for the kidneys and the liver and the supporting organs to start functioning and processing and working this through so it doesn't become a burden, so it doesn't turn into disease. All you're doing is asking the body to work for you. The infrared heat is giving it the support to kick these things into gear a bit. And then the second thing I want to say is that's exactly why I started this show, Bryan, and why I wanted to invite you is the things you mentioned, like bringing these modalities into our home so that we're not chasing our health backwards. You know, as I mentioned, my stroke years ago, what a warning shot it was. Basically the biggest check engine of my life. We've all had check engine lights, some bigger, some smaller. For me, I'm grateful every day that it paralyzed the left side of my body for a few years. I'm still working through some functionality or some motor function skills in my left hand. I have struggles. Some days are good, some days are better than others with balance because I lost so much muscle and nerve damage in the left side of the body. But thank God I'm still here. And I found all these resources that supported my body: oxygen chamber, red light therapy, sauna, heat therapy, de-stressing, getting rid of some things in my life that were causing me the stress to put the pieces back together. But it is my mission every single day to continue to support my body and my health so that I don't have that. And so that's the beautiful thing about bringing these therapies into your home is it just becomes part of your wellness wheel and part of your lifestyle so that you just feel fantastic. So I guess in closing, any additional valuable insight that you want to share, direction that you think listeners, whether it be firefighters or just people in general, anything else that you want to share that you think would be beneficial?
You know, as far as this conversation is concerned, I think that, my wife made a comment to me when we bought the sauna and the cold plunge unit. And look, they're not $100, right? They have a price tag to them. For me, for the bang for the buck, it's an investment in your health. And I thought it was more than a reasonable price to pay. My cold plunge, I think, cost $3,300. Like, you got the pricing for all your saunas. There's different models you can go with. The one that we bought fits our budget. But I will say this too. As a grandfather now, I have a 19-month-old, almost 20-month-old granddaughter. For anybody who's ever ordered a toy on Amazon or bought it at Toys R Us or wherever, it takes 9 hours to put together. You can't even get it out of the package. It was the easiest assembly, and it was the best quality. I'm not doing this to intentionally plug what you're putting out there, but my buddy Tony Quint that introduced us together, he's the one that had done all the research and tried to figure out which the best saunas were for the money. Man, it was fantastic. The walls were so straight. Everything is a 90-degree angle. It just fits together. So the instructions were simple, but the investment, the return on the investment that we've already gotten in a couple weeks, it's amazing for my wife and I to just, we feel so relaxed when we get out. And for me, I love jumping in the cold plunge afterwards. She likes to enjoy the sauna without the cold plunge afterwards. She still does the cold plunge, but right now she's just really enjoying the way her muscles feel. She works out a lot. And for what somebody might spend if you drink whiskey a couple times a week, look at your tab at the end of the year, right? Do the math. All the other things that people do and spend money on, we've just decided to make a concerted effort and be very mindful of our own health. And whether it's a sauna or a cold plunge or just investing in magnesium and drinking it at night, make the investment. Like the workouts, the endorphin release that you get, the dopamine, the serotonin, all these things are not just scientifically proven recently. This information has been out for decades, if not a century, right? Like it's out there. The Vikings and the people that used to do saunas and jump in the ice cold rivers and lakes, they do it for a reason. And I will tell you, it makes you feel fantastic. So I would just encourage them to, whatever they're looking into, make the investment in yourself, because why do you work for 30, 40, 50 years at anything only to be unhealthy when you retire? You can't even enjoy whatever you've earned.
I agree. I always say we can pay for it now or we can pay for it later, right? We might as well enjoy this life while we're here. So I am excited, for you to get your red light therapy. We're going to chat about that once you incorporate that. That's a whole other topic. That's a whole nother element. I'm curious, when do you do your sauna? Do you do it morning or in the evening?
So far, we've been doing it in the evening.
Evenings? Okay. Yeah.
I'm
Very nice.
a little bit rushed. She wakes up early. She works out of home and she's up at 4:30 already on the computer doing her thing. She's a claims adjuster. So like pretty stressful for her. So at the end of the day, it helps her wind down and then I'm ready for it too.
I was just going to say, what a beautiful way to wind down. It sounds like you guys have an amazing routine. So, Bryan, I can't even hardly put into words how much I appreciate you and taking this time today. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our friendship. I mean, the job that I get to do every day to meet people like you and the connections that I've had the opportunity to be a part of over the last 10, 15 years of being in this wellness world it's the greatest joy of my life. Like it's hard for me to articulate. It just makes me very emotional, but I am deeply passionate about serving and supporting the firefighter community. We're going to continue to keep this conversation going, and anything that I can do to support the Phoenix Fire Department, the Scottsdale Fire Department. Obviously, you and I will continue to talk, but thank you so much for sharing your story and being so incredibly honest and vulnerable about the entire journey.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do it. It's been an honor and I appreciate you. And thanks for the newfound friendship too.
Okay, friends and fellow wellness warriors, thanks for tuning in today. If this show was helpful and inspired you, please head over to Apple or Spotify to rate, review, subscribe, and follow us, as well as share it with your friends and family. It's a fantastic way to grow the show, expand my reach, and teach others how to create a vibrant life they love. If you're ready to invest in your health and purchase a Clear Light sauna, hop on over to jenhellerlifestyle.com and send me a note. Thanks again for tuning in. I love you. I'm grateful for you. And I thank you so much for your support. You are the reason I do this work. You are the reason I do this show. And you are the reason I get up every single day with a burning desire in my soul. Cheers to your health and happiness, my friends. We'll see you next week. This podcast is for general information purposes only and is not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you think you have a medical condition, consult your licensed physician.